22 months. 22 months. That's how long it had been since I signed the papers in a boardroom on the 34th floor of a glass tower in downtown Toronto, with a lawyer I'd never met, and a pen that felt heavier than anything I'd ever held in my life. 22 months since I'd walked out of that building, past the security desk where the guard nodded at me, like I was just another person, having just another Tuesday, and stood on Bay Street in November with no coat because I'd left it in the cloakroom upstairs, and I couldn't go back. I just couldn't. I didn't cry until I got to the parking garage, and even then it wasn't the kind of crying that feels like release. It was the kind that happens when your body finally catches up to something your mind has known for a long time. The marriage was over. Xander and I were done. And in 22 months, I had built something that looked, from the outside, a lot like a life. A rental apartment in the annex with exposed brick and a radiator that clanged every night at 11. A part-time position at the gallery on Spadina that paid just enough to cover groceries, and not quite enough for anything else. A daughter who had her father's dark eyes and, thank God, my stubbornness. Her name was June. She was 14 months old, and she had never once in her entire short life slept past 5:30 in the morning. It was a Thursday night, not a Friday, not a weekend, just an ordinary Thursday in February, when she started coughing. At first I thought nothing of it. Every parent in Canada spends roughly 7 months of the year waiting for their kid to catch whatever is going around the daycare. And this time of year, it was always something respiratory. I gave her a little honey in warm water, the way my mother used to do, and I sat in the rocking chair beside her crib and hummed until her eyes drooped. She woke up an hour later burning. I took her temperature 3 times because I didn't trust the reading. 39.8. Then 40.1. Then the thermometer beeped at me in a way that felt almost apologetic, like it knew. I called Telehealth Ontario. The nurse on the line had a calm, professional voice that somehow made everything more frightening rather than less. She asked me her age, her symptoms, how long the fever had been climbing. She asked if June's breathing seemed labored. I held the phone to my daughter's chest so the nurse could hear. There was a pause. "I'd recommend you take her in," the nurse said. "Don't wait until morning." I didn't. Sick Kids was 40 minutes from my apartment on a good night. At 11:15 on a February Thursday, with no traffic and a baby strapped into her car seat behind me making a sound I had never heard her make before, a thin, reedy wheeze. It took me 23 minutes. I know, because I watched the clock the entire way and kept talking to her, kept saying her name, kept telling her, "We were almost there. Almost there, baby. Almost there." The triage nurse took one look at her and we didn't wait. They moved us into a room, and people came in quickly and quietly and did things with efficiency that was both reassuring and absolutely terrifying. June screamed when they put the pulse oximeter on her finger. I held her hand and said her name until she stopped screaming and just stared at me with those big dark eyes that weren't mine. A doctor came in. Young, efficient, kind in the specific way that emergency physicians learn to be kind. Direct, no wasted words, nothing to cause unnecessary alarm. She asked the standard questions. June's birth history, her vaccination record, any known allergies. Then she pulled up something on her tablet and looked at me. "We're going to run some blood work," she said. "There's a possibility we're looking at a genetic component to what's happening with her lungs. For the panel we need to run, it's helpful to have information from both biological parents." She paused. "Is the father available?" The room tilted slightly. I'd known this moment would come someday. I'd told myself I was prepared for it. I had rehearsed in the shower, in the car, lying awake at 2 a.m., with June asleep on my chest, exactly what I would say and how I would say it. None of it came out the way I'd rehearsed. I said. "I can try to reach him. I had his number still." "Of course I did. You don't delete a number like that. You just bury it under enough time that looking at it starts to feel like archaeology." I sat in the hallway outside June's room, and I stared at his name on my phone for a long time. Alexander Whitmore. I had met him at a fundraising gala for a children's literacy program, which in retrospect is the kind of irony that would be too obvious in a novel. He was there because his company had written a check large enough to get his name on a wall. I was there because I'd helped curate the silent auction, We'd ended up at the same table, and he had been, despite everything I'd heard about him, despite everything I'd see later, he'd been genuinely funny. Self-deprecating in a way that didn't seem performed. He'd made me laugh 3 times in the first hour, and I'm not an easy laugh. We were married 11 months later. I should say, for anyone listening, that I don't think Xander was a bad person. I want to be careful about that. He was a complicated person, and some of those complications turned out to be incompatible with the kind of life I needed to live. He ran a private equity firm with offices in Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver. He worked 14-hour days, 6 days a week, and considered this not just normal but virtuous. He believed, genuinely and without irony, that being present for dinner twice a week counted as being present. I asked him, once, about children. We'd been together 3 years, married for almost 2. I was 31, and the question felt increasingly non-theoretical. He'd looked at me from across the kitchen island, with an expression I can only describe as patient. The way you look at someone when you're about to explain something you believe should already be obvious. I'm not opposed to it eventually, he said, but not now. We don't have the bandwidth right now. We, as though his bandwidth were mine by extension. I nodded. I said okay, and then I went upstairs and sat on the bathroom floor for a while, which is something I'd been doing more and more often in that marriage. Finding small, enclosed spaces to take stock of things in private. 6 weeks later, I was pregnant. I hadn't planned it. I want to be clear about that too. But when I saw the result, when that word appeared on the little screen, the thing I felt most strongly, more than shock, more than fear, was a ferocious and immediate protectiveness that told me everything I needed to know about what I was going to do. I told him. He was not angry, exactly. He was measured. He said the timing wasn't ideal. He said he thought we should talk to someone. He said the word decision, in a tone that made very clear what decision he thought I should be making. I filed for divorce 2 months later. I never told him I was pregnant when I left. My finger hovered over his name for a long time in that hospital hallway. Then I pressed call. It rang 4 times and I was already rehearsing the voicemail when he picked up. Hello? His voice was exactly the same. Of course it was. 22 months is not so long in the grand scheme of things. It's me, I said. A pause. Not a hostile pause. More like the kind of pause that happens when someone is trying to recalibrate. Nadia, he said. I need to tell you something, I said, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. Can you do that? Another pause. Yes. So I told him. All of it. June's name, her age. The way she laughed at the cat that lived next door. The way she said something that sounded almost like bird when she saw pigeons on the fire escape. I told him she had his eyes, and that I had noticed this every single day for 14 months, and I didn't know if that was wonderful or unbearable. I told him we were at Sick Kids, and that the doctors needed his genetic information, and that was why I was calling. But also, my voice broke here. Just slightly. I pulled it back. Also, I thought you should know. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry it happened this way. Silence. Then, what hospital did you say? Sick Kids. On University. I'm 40 minutes away. You don't have to. Nadia. His voice was very quiet. I'll be there in 40 minutes. He arrived in 35. I was in the hallway when I saw him come through the main entrance. He was still in his work clothes, dark suit, no tie. The top button of his shirt undone the way it always was by evening. He looked older, not in a bad way, just in the way that people look when time has passed for them too, which somehow always comes as a surprise. He stopped when he saw me. Neither of us moved for a moment. Then he crossed the distance, and he didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything. And when he put his arms around me, I stood very still and let it happen, because I was so tired, so completely hollowed out with fear, that I didn't have the energy to decide how I felt about it. How is she? He said into my hair. Stable, they think. They're still running tests. He pulled back and looked at me, and I watched him reading my face the way he always used to, carefully, like a document he needed to understand before he could respond to it. Okay, he said. Tell me what you need. They let us both into the room. June was asleep, finally, with a small pulse oximeter on her foot and an IV in her tiny arm, and Xander stood at the side of her crib and looked at her for a long time without speaking. I stood in the doorway and watched him look at her. There is no preparation for that moment. None. You can imagine it 1,000 times, and you will still not be prepared for the actual weight of it. A man seeing his child for the first time, a child who is 14 months old, and already a person, already herself, already entirely formed. When he finally looked up at me, his face was something I don't have good words for. Not angry. Not hurt. Exactly, though I think that came later. Something more like the look of a person who has just understood something very large and very important and is still working out what it means. "She's beautiful," he said. "I know," I said. The blood panel came back in the early hours of the morning. Respiratory syncytial virus. RSV, combined with a mild inherited variant they wanted to monitor, but considered manageable. Nothing requiring surgery. Nothing requiring immediate intervention beyond what they were already doing. The doctor on the morning shift explained it to us both in the room, and I noticed she addressed us equally, as though we were the kind of parents who had been in this together from the beginning. We let her believe that. It seemed unkind to correct her. By 6 a.m, June was breathing steadily, and her fever had come down to 38.1, and she had woken up, long enough to grab Xander's finger with her whole fist, in the way that babies do, reflexively, completely unaware of the significance of what they're doing. He didn't move his hand for a very long time. We got coffee from the vending machine down the hall. It was terrible. We drank it anyway. "I want to be angry at you," he said. "I know, you should be. A little, I'm trying." He looked at the cup. "I keep getting distracted from it." By what? By the fact that she grabbed my hand. I stared at my own terrible coffee. "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. Then I meant what I said. Back then, about the timing. I wasn't saying I didn't want. He stopped, started again. "I didn't handle that conversation well." "No, I didn't handle a lot of conversations well." "No," I said again, because it seemed fairer not to argue with him on this one. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. Not accusatory, just honest. "When you left, you were all ready." "Because," I said, and I had to be careful here, had to be accurate, because I thought if I told you, you would try to manage it, the way you manage everything. And I needed to make the decision myself about whether to, I needed it to be mine. He looked at me for a long time. "And then?" he said. "And then she was born, and she was so herself, so immediately just her. And I thought, I can do this. I am doing this." And every month that went by made it feel more impossible to call. "More impossible," he said, "or more frightening." I thought about that. Both. He nodded slowly. "She looks like me," he said. "I know. Is that strange for you?" "Every single day," I said. And then, because it was 6 a.m, and I was running on adrenaline and vending machine coffee and the specific honesty that comes from genuine exhaustion, and I wouldn't change it. He came back the next day, and the day after that. June came home on a Saturday. He helped me carry her things to the car, and then stood on the sidewalk in front of the hospital, looking at me with an expression I recognized. The look of a man who has more to say, and is deciding how much of it to say. "I'd like to be part of her life," he said. "If that's something you're open to, I'm open to it. I'd like to." He paused. "I'd like to try to do this properly. Whatever that looks like." I looked at him. 42 years old. Still in his work clothes because he was always in his work clothes. His hair was longer than I remembered. He looked, for the first time in the years I'd known him, slightly unmoored. Unsure of the protocol. Good, I thought, but not unkindly. He needed to be unsure of the protocol for a while. "We can start slow," I said. "That's probably better for June anyway. She needs to get used to you." "Right," he said. "Of course." He glanced into the back seat where she was already blinking at him with great seriousness, assessing him the way babies assess everything, thoroughly and without social pretense. "Does she?" He stopped. "What does she call people? Does she have words yet?" "She says something that might be bird," I said, "and no." Emphatically and often, he smiled. It was the same smile, exactly the same. "That's mine," he said. "The stubbornness is mine," I said. "We can argue about the bird later." It would be dishonest to say the next few months were easy. They weren't. There were lawyers involved again, but this time, they were the kind of lawyers who talk about parenting agreements instead of settlement terms, which is a different kind of exhausting. There were Saturday morning handoffs in the parking lot of the Loblaws on Bloor that felt stilted and strange. There were phone calls about schedules and questions about routines, and one particular evening, when he called to ask if June had a favorite song, and I stood in my kitchen for a moment. After I hung up, not knowing whether I wanted to laugh or cry, so I did a little of both. He made mistakes. So did I. He missed one pickup in March because of a call from Calgary that ran long, and I sat in the apartment with June on my lap, thinking things that were probably unfair and definitely understandable. He called 20 minutes later, and I could hear, underneath the professional composure, that he knew. He knew what I was thinking, and he said simply, "I'm sorry, I'm leaving now." He made it in 18 minutes. June didn't notice. I noticed everything. But here is what I also noticed. The way he got down on the floor to play with her. Without being asked, without self-consciousness. In a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The way he learned her rhythms. That she needed 10 minutes of quiet after waking up. That she found strangers funny rather than frightening. That she would share her crackers with anyone, but would not under any circumstances share her small stuffed moose. The moose had been a gift from my mother. It was named, by popular consensus, Biscuit. June did not know this was also a dog's name, and we saw no reason to tell her. He learned her name for it. He learned to ask after Biscuit with complete seriousness, as though Biscuit had feelings that mattered and required consideration. That told me more about him than a year of conversations would have. There was something else, though. Something I hadn't told him yet. I hadn't told him about the messages. They'd started arriving about a month before June was born. Unsigned, untraceable, coming through the gallery's general email address and then, more alarmingly, through my personal one. They weren't threatening exactly. They were just informational. Little dispatches about where I was living, who I was seeing, what I was doing. Just enough detail to communicate that someone was paying attention. I'd assumed for a long time that it was someone connected to Xander. The divorce had not been uncomplicated. His lawyers had been thorough. I'd thought it was surveillance, the professional kind, and I'd made my peace with the fact that powerful people sometimes kept tabs on situations they considered unresolved. But then the messages changed. About 6 weeks after June was born, the tone shifted. They became less observational. They started including information about Xander, his schedule, his meetings, a deal he was working on in Vancouver. Information that someone inside his company would have. Information that was being offered to me, I slowly understood, not as a threat but as a trade. Someone wanted me to use it against him. Someone wanted me to take it to a journalist, or a regulator, or somewhere it would do damage. I didn't know who. I didn't know why. And I had sat on it for 14 months because I had a newborn and an apartment with a clanging radiator, and I was already carrying enough. I told him on a Wednesday evening in April, sitting on my couch with June asleep down the hall, and the windows letting in the sound of the street below. I showed him everything. All of it, going back to before she was born. He read through it twice. His face was very still. "How long have you had this?" he said. "The first one came when I was 37 weeks pregnant." He looked up. Something moved across his expression that I think was the understanding of how alone I'd been in this, how long I'd carried it. "Why didn't you?" He stopped. "Right. Because you didn't trust me." "I didn't know you anymore," I said. "That's not the same thing." He was quiet for a moment. Then he set the phone down carefully on the coffee table. "I know who this is," he said. I looked at him. "There's a woman at the firm," he said. "Senior analyst. She was up for a partnership last year that I gave to someone else. She's been building a file on me for months. My legal team found out 3 weeks ago." He paused. "She apparently found out about our separation and decided you were the useful vector." "The useful vector," I repeated. "I'm sorry. That's a terrible way to put it. It's a very Xander way to put it." Something flickered across his face. "Yeah, I know." He looked at the phone again, then at me. "I'm going to deal with it. Through proper channels. HR and legal. It's already in motion." He paused. "But I want you to know that whatever she was hoping you'd do with that information, the reason you didn't, that matters to me." "I didn't do it because it was wrong," I said. "Not for you." "I know," he said. "That's exactly what I mean." June turned 16 months old on a Thursday in May. We celebrated at my apartment. Cake from the Portuguese bakery, 2 blocks over. a balloon that she was terrified of, and then immediately obsessed with. My mother arriving from Hamilton with a bag of gifts large enough to suggest she'd been shopping since roughly the moment of the child's birth. Xander came. He arrived exactly on time, which he was not known for, and he brought a card that he had clearly agonized over because it said almost nothing. Just her name, and a small drawing of a bird that was not technically very good. She loved it. She carried it around for the rest of the afternoon, slightly crumpling it, occasionally showing it to Biscuit for a second opinion. My mother pulled me into the kitchen at one point under the pretense of cutting more cake. "He seems different," she said. "He is different," I said. "A little." She looked at me with the specific look that mothers deploy when they are choosing not to say everything they're thinking. "A little," she agreed. Later, after June was in bed and my mother had driven back to Hamilton, and the apartment was quiet in the specific way it gets, when a party has just ended, he helped me stack the plates. He washed. I dried. We had done this exactly once before, in the house on Rosedale Valley Road, and the memory of it was so precise that I had to look away for a moment. "She had a good day," he said. "She had a great day. She was afraid of the balloon, and then she loved it," I said. "That seems right," he said. "That seems like her." I looked at him sideways. He was looking at the dish he was washing, not at me. "Xander," I said. "Yeah, we're not going to rush into anything. I know, I mean it. Whatever this is, whatever we're figuring out, it happens slowly. For June, and also for me." He turned off the tap. He turned to look at me. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm just..." He stopped, and then very simply, "I'm just glad you called." I thought about the hallway outside June's room, the weight of his name on my screen, the 4 rings before he picked up. "I almost didn't," I said. "I know that too." He paused. "I'm glad you did anyway." I put the last dish away. Outside, the street was quiet the way it sometimes gets in the annex on weeknights. Just the distant sound of a streetcar somewhere, and the specific urban silence that isn't really silence at all. "You can come next Thursday," I said. "We usually go to the farmer's market on Borden Street. She likes to look at the vegetables even though she won't eat most of them." He smiled. "I'll be there. On time, he said. Down the hall from June's room came a small, sleepy sound. Not distress, just the ordinary murmuring of a child rearranging herself in her crib, announcing through the baby monitor that she was still there, still herself, still entirely and firmly present in all our lives. We both went still for a moment, listening. Then the sound settled into quiet breathing, and the night continued, and somewhere across the city a streetcar rang its bell, and I stood in my kitchen with my daughter's father washing dishes together, and thought, this is not the life I planned. It is not the life I would have written for myself if you'd handed me a pen and said, here, go ahead. But June was asleep down the hall, with a slightly crumpled drawing of a bird, and for the first time in 22 months, the radiator clanged at 11 o'clock, and I didn't feel alone when it did.